Hello everyone and welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Josh, joined today by the man who plays everything, Scott Tilford.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, I wish I was known as that, but I don't think that playing Sonic Adventure in 2021 is a worthwhile qualifier.
Now, the moment you started playing that and Toy Story 3, like, you are eternally the man who plays everything to me, and that's the most important IMO. Anyway, we have some actual news to dive into, because you might have noticed that the planned February patch for Cyberpunk 2077 has not arrived. However, there is a pretty big reason as to why. Scott Tilford, you have all of the information. Please tell me what's continuing to go on with this game.
Well, so I was going to say the one thing I'm not playing is Cyberpunk 2077 because it's in a bit of a state. So the thing that there's a real reason to this, because the information that CDPR put out, the Cyberpunk Twitter, did a tweet on the 24th, just the other day, saying that they were delaying the February patch until late March. Just sort of saying that, look, the patch, patch 1.2 goes beyond any of our previous updates. We've been working on numerous overall quality improvements and fixes, and we still have to do a lot to make sure that's what you get. They also kind of around that sort of cite the whole, obviously the whole hacking thing of February 9th. They had this whole bunch of hackers that infiltrated their private network and stole the source code for The Witcher and Cyberpunk. And that was the sort of general idea that sort of affected, they got out there and said, look, don't worry, customer information wasn't affected. We're going to sort of like plod along with the game. Obviously, they then had to sort of delay the February patch. But the real reason stuff comes from Jason Schreier, who over on Bloomberg wrote up that following the hack, this drastically affected the employees directly because they couldn't, or they haven't been able to get back onto their private network. So, like I said, CDPR mentioned that customer data wasn't breached, but employee personal data has been. The invaders may have had access to their personal information, including Polish identification numbers and passport details, leading to the company telling staff to freeze their accounts and report the security breach to relevant parties. Workers have been asked to ship their computers to CDPR's IT staff to be scanned for malware and other intrusions. And then Schreier also tweeted saying that all of that has led to CDPR not being able to work on the game for the last 2 weeks. Or at least the majority of their employees who are working remotely haven't had access to the game just because they can't get on their internal network, which was also included in one of the older Bloomberg reports as to why Cyberpunk was in such a state anyway, because they had so many disparate QA teams and development teams, and everyone's trying to do stuff just because of this reality of 2020. So the whole real reason thing is that it has the hack from February 9th has drastically affected the employees, and they're struggling to even sort their own personal information out, which just give them a break. I know. Sounds horrible.
It sounds like a total nightmare, man. Like, I imagine it was going to be difficult enough to get these patches out under regular circumstances, like the bosses of CD Projekt Red, like, they're getting involved in a bunch of different lawsuits with a bunch of different companies. You've got, obviously, the backlash from players. Now you've got this awful hack which literally stops them from working on the game, happening right now. It just feels like it's one thing after another with this. And at this point, like, I only have sympathy for, like, the devs who have been working on this game for however many years now, had to see it pushed out, in an unfinished state, then had to come back and try and fix everything while everyone was shouting at them, and now having to go through this is just like, man, like you said, I wish you could just kind of like cut them some kind of break. And I think, I think in this situation, everyone will understand why the patch isn't ready to go and why we have to wait an extra few weeks until March or whenever, when hopefully they can get it out, because it feels like there are bigger things afoot right now.
Well, so CDPR also refused to give in to the demands of the hackers, the people who were taking their code and saying, look, pay us a bunch of money, or we're just going to sell this on the black coding market or whatever it is. CDPR obviously not going to bow to that. In fact, they released the statement from the hackers just to sort of shed some light on it and everything. But apparently since then, Witcher 3's code, Cyberpunk's code has started to be sold online. But obviously the brass tacks reality of that is if you were a game dev, if you were any studio showing up with code taken from Cyberpunk, from CD Projekt, that's going to get flagged immediately. So it's such a ridiculous thing anyway. But I think the human cost of it, is worth flagging. I think at some point, I don't know how well it would go down optically if the CDPR just sort of said, look, we're actually going to take another year. We're just going to actually take as long as it takes. Because another recent statement from Jim Ryan, Sony's Jim Ryan, literally said that, it'll be on the PlayStation, because it's not even on the PlayStation Store. It hasn't been on there since launch, which is obviously coming up on 3 months now. About to be 3 months. And so Jim Ryan was saying that, look, it'll be on there when it's right, which has kind of been taken as like a him throwing shade type thing, which is like fair enough, I guess. If you're running a business and they weren't able to provide the product that they said, then okay. But because it is already kind of hampered so much, to me, when I think back on it, I'm like, it doesn't even feel like the game launched. Like, we had this initial sort of period of coverage. We covered the story type stuff. We did a couple of spoiler casts, but so many people were waiting to play it, especially on the console side. Do you think that at some point, if they just sort of said, look, we got it wrong, we're suffering all this stuff, 2020 was a bit of a thing, still going on, let's actually just delay everything, pull it from the Xbox store and put it out properly, do the next gen version and do that whole thing maybe later this year or next year?
I mean, I feel like the ship sadly sailed for that. That might maybe be the best way for them to improve on the game without all of this external pressure. But at the same time, man, like, how many copies did this thing sell at launch? Wasn't it like 12 or 13 million?
Yeah, they still keep their sales.
Refunds? Yeah, like a lot of people still have this game, even though there are perhaps an equal amount waiting for it to be, bought, but like that's 10 plus million people who currently own it, and a lot of those people are kind of waiting on patches. And I think if you just kind of like left them out for a whole year, that would ultimately cause more problems. With that said, I do think that they're making the right decision by not just trying to rush anything out now under the circumstances, because they laid out their roadmap or whatever, and they were like, right, the January patch, the February patch, they're going to be substantial, they're going to change the game, they're not going to completely fix it, but they're going to be big patches. So I think if they just had what they had in February and try to push that out now, and it wasn't that substantial, that might ultimately cause more problems. So I am pleased that
that was the thing with the January one, because it was like these two patches were meant to be these substantial patches, which was always rang a bit false, because they announced them like in all the fallout from the initial when the game initially launched and it was a complete mess, and they said, hey, don't worry, we'll fix it. We've got 2 major patches coming January, February, and I think a lot of people rightfully sort of assumed that these are the patches that are going to add things like the police system or do something that's more meaningful. And then the January patch hit, and it was just more of the same. And there's still so much footage of the bugs and glitches left, right, and center, even on powerful systems, PS5, Series X, that's still doing the rounds. In the January patch, it felt like another hotfix. It didn't feel like a meaningful content upgrade. Obviously, they're saying now the February patch was totally going to be that thing. But in a way, this adds even more undue stress to whatever this patch is going to be, because they have a month's delay, but they still can't get on their private network to be right now to even put it together. So it's like they're in like a no-win situation, and I don't know how to free the pressure up other than just sort of stepping back altogether.
I mean, you make a great point. If they did step back and then they completely reworked everything and kind of got the game up to a standard that everyone kind of expected, like that would be cool. But I wonder what the expectations even are for this game to be complete. Because on the one hand, you've got people who are like, right, you need to fix all the bugs, you need to fix the frame rate, you need to make sure it doesn't crash every 5 minutes. But is eliminating those bugs, will that make the fan base happy to begin with, or do they have to go further? Like you said, is it only complete when you've changed some of the systems around and you've implemented a proper police system, for instance, or you've changed, the driving patterns or the NPC behavior and stuff like that. But then I imagine there's an even further part of the fan base who's like, look, that's not good enough. What we want is the game that was promised at E3 or whenever. Yeah. Where are the extended life paths? Where are these decisions? Like, why isn't that in the game? You know what I mean? So which part of this kind of audience that you have that have bought into the game, like, how do you get this title to a point where you kind of like satisfy everyone and say, right, this is the finished version, the bugs are done, these features aren't going to come, this is it complete? Like, when do we get to that point? Will that point ever come, or is it going to be this constant thing of patching and updating?
Yeah, I don't see a reality where that stuff comes true. Like, I just don't. All the life path stuff requires completely upending the entire story. Like, there's all the behind the scenes stuff about when Keanu Reeves came onto the project and how they changed a lot of the story to fit him in, and how that sort of affected the version they had beforehand. And all the original lead designers left the project when that happened. So it's just like, there's so much there where at some point maybe we just have to chalk it up to like, this is the version of Cyberpunk that we got, discard everything beforehand, and what are the pros and cons of the existing version of it, which is always how I would personally approach a review or whatever. Like, I can look at the stuff that got canned or ripped out, and that stuff is fascinating. But like, I don't think they're ever going to get around to essentially giving you 3 different versions of Cyberpunk. For as much as they advertised that stuff and said that it was, everybody will play differently and whatever. I mean, that is a worthwhile thing to hold up, that the marketing doesn't line up with the game. But eventually we'll hold up the pros and cons of the game as a standalone thing, divorced from its ridiculous marketing and divorced from the problems that it had in development. But yeah, I don't know. Like, for me, I really like Cyberpunk. If you fix the patches, if you fix the bugs, make it so the animation's a bit smoother, make it so it doesn't crash every 2 hours, then for me, it's pretty bang on. But I completely understand that if you were following it week to week or month to month or even year to year, it's not the version that was advertised, and that's a massive thing to obviously address. Like, do you have a thing, like a state that you would want it to get into, like to be able to remotely call it finished?
I don't know. I think as long as you fixed up like the main issues, like I said, like the crashes, frame rate, performance and stuff like that, like the life path stuff, it's always going to be kind of annoying that it's not in the game. But you know, so many games change from what was marketed, and yeah, you were right to get annoyed if that's why you pre-ordered, you know what I mean? But at the same time, like you said, I feel like there needs to be a kind of disconnect from that stuff to kind of analyze the game on its own merits and then decide whether or not it's good or bad. But it feels like that's still going to be quite a long time in the future, you know, even on the roadmap before all of these recent happenings and hacks went down. Like, it would still seem like it was the end of 2021 at the earliest that we were going to get a proper finished version of that game. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about the whole Cyberpunk situation at the moment? And like we said at the beginning, in this case, I think you can totally cut the developers some slack considering all of the stuff they're going through and how they literally cannot work on the game right now. But yeah, it's not a good situation, but let us know. And while you're down there, can you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't, though, I've been Josh, joined by Scott yet again, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.